All right. So these three frogs were looking for flies one day near the bank of a swamp. But due to the scarcity of the number and due to the fact that the ones that were out and about were very difficult to reach, they decided to abandon task and move somewhere else. However, one of the frogs notices that there is a swarm of flies hovering above the deeper part of the water of the swamp. So they begin heading in that direction. Then they notice a shadow lurking below the surface. Sure enough, a blue heron is looking for food. And all three of those frogs would get eaten before they could make it to the swarm of flies. So two of the frogs quickly give up and are beginning to head elsewhere. But the third frog stays behind. And he begins assessing the situation to see how he could reach that swarm of flies. Then an idea occurs to him. If he could throw an object into the water and use that object as it floats to springboard and grab that swarm of flies before his body descends below the surface into the line of sight of the blue heron, it could be a success. So he begins looking around, and the first thing that he finds is a maple leaf. So he throws the maple leaf onto the water. Sure enough, it floats. He takes a leap off the shore onto the leaf, but as soon as his feet made contact with the leaf, he descends below the water, unable to support his weight. So he begins swimming his way to the shore and makes his way out of the water, noticing the two frogs are laughing at him. He's discouraged, but he's not defeated. So then he looks around and he finds a weeping willow leaf. Once again, he throws it into the water, it floats, and then he takes another leap onto the leaf. But as soon as his feet made contact with the leaf, he descends below the water again. This time, he's beginning to sink, noticing on the reflection of the water that the other two frogs are still laughing at him. By this point, you could say they took his confidence and it was ribbit in half. As he's descending, he notices a lily pad that is attached to the stem below the surface. And he begins to notice other lily pads in the surrounding area that are also floating on the surface of the water. So another idea occurs to him. He grabs that lily pad and begins to make a path of lily pads that are clear, that create a clear pathway to the swarm of flies. He goes back to the shore and he takes one more gigantic leap. And this time, when he lands on the lily pad, he stays afloat. And he hops the entire trajectory of the pathway until he reaches the swarm of flies and is able to feast, all the while staying out of the line of sight of the blue heron. Here is the lesson. There are many risks that we need to take in life, and each and every one of them must be approached with a leap of faith. If you are feeling discouraged, you can do it. And now you can say, at the end of the day, someone told you so. So the other day I was walking home with my kids and they asked me to tell them a story. So I said, let me tell you about these four guys who lived in a community next to a river, and they were looking to do some good within the community. Well, there was this little old lady who was on her porch and she wanted a glass of water. But because she had just recently injured her foot, she couldn't walk all the way down to the river to get it, and she didn't have any running water in her own house. So one day, the first guy was walking by and noticed this lady wanted a glass of water. So he takes the glass and he walks all the way down to the river, fills the glass up with water, gives it to the lady, she drinks, and her thirst is quenched. Well, the very next day, the second guy is walking by and he notices that this lady wants a glass of water. So he says, I'm going to bring her to the water. And so he goes over to some trees, he chops them down and carves and creates these wooden crutches that allow her to be able to walk with her injured foot all the way down to the water, fill up the glass with water, drink, and quench her thirst. Well, the next day, the third guy is walking by and he notices this lady on crutches walking all the way to the water to get a drink. And he says, I'm going to bring the water to her. And so he builds a well right outside her house and channels the river water to come right in front of her house and fill up in the well. And this lady pulls up a bucket, takes her glass, dips it into the bucket, drinks, and her thirst is quenched. And so I told the boys, see how each of these guys was able to help this lady in a very unique but significant way? And then my son says, Dad, what about the fourth person? You said there were four people. What did the fourth person do? I said, very good for paying attention. The fourth person is the one telling the story. So, when I was younger, I conducted a small survey with a dentist, a hairstylist, and a nail tech. And I asked each of them what was the first characteristic they looked at when considering pursuing a romantic relationship with someone. The dentist told me that naturally they look at that person's teeth. The hairstylist told me that naturally they look at that person's hair. And the nail tech told me that naturally they look at that person's nails. So, considering the pattern, I decided that I wanted to pursue a relationship with a heart surgeon. All right. So these two cucumbers were walking along one day when they notice a pickle in the distance coming straight toward them. And they get so excited that they immediately go up to him and begin asking him about his transformation process from a cucumber into a pickle. And the pickle looks at him with this smirk on his face and he says, "Ah, got yourself into a pickle, huh?" Well, there are 3 phases of the transformation: sanitation, saturation, and sterilization. And the two cucumbers have this confused look on their face, so he elaborates. Step 1, clean yourself. Step 2, go for a swim in some salt brine. Step 3, find a nice great big jar and seal yourself in it. So the cucumbers thank him for his time, to which he responds, it was no big deal. And he gives him a salute and then he walks off. So the first cucumber goes up to the tub and scrub, where he's given a brush and a bucket to initiate the cleaning of the sanitation phase. He looks at the brush and the bucket and he throws them to the side. He does a quick rinse and then he walks out just as casually as he came in. Next, he goes to the salt brine shrine, where a gentleman is waiting to help him begin what that gentleman called the curing process of the saturation phase. Curiously, the gentleman called himself a curator. And he leads the cucumber to this pool of salt brine, where he is permitted to swim for as long as he needs. The cucumber dives into the pool, does a few laps, gets out, dries himself off, and then walks out just as casually as he came in. Next, he goes to the jar bar, where he finds a jar that is just perfect for his size, and he lowers himself into the jar, seals the top, and he waits. After about an hour, he pops the seal, he hoists himself out, and he goes straight for a mirror. To his utter dismay, he is still a cucumber. "I don't understand," he says. "I did exactly what I was told. Why didn't the transformation work?" And he walks out more downtrodden than when he came in. The second cucumber also goes to the tub and scrub, where he's given a brush and a bucket, and he scrubs himself for not 1, not 2, but 7 times. And when he left, there was not a single speck of dirt on his entire body. Then he goes to the salt brine shrine, where he too is permitted to swim for as long as he needed. And he swam laps in the pool for not 1, not 2, but 7 days. And when he got out of the pool, there was an obvious change in his complexion and his appearance. His very essence seemed different. Then he went to the jar bar, where he too lowered himself into a jar, sealed the top, and he waited for not 1, not 2, but 7 weeks. And he pops the seal, he hoists himself out, and he goes straight to the mirror, and he looks at his reflection, and staring back at him is not the aforementioned cucumber, but a bright and shining pickle. And he walks out with his head held high. Here is the lesson. True transformation takes time. And while the process may seem cumbersome at first, the more you immerse yourself in it, the more it becomes something you relish. All right. So deep in the Amazon rainforest, all the birds had gathered together to decide which of all the birds in the entire rainforest was the most charismatic and the most talented. A vote was taken, and it ended in a tie between 2 birds, a parrot and a peacock. And all the birds that had taken a vote felt so strongly about their choice that when the vote was taken again, the results were the exact same. Finally, a wise owl suggested that the entire dispute could be settled with a simple competition. Both birds would make their way to an area that was crowded with humans, and whichever bird could convince more humans to give that bird food would win the competition. After the terms were agreed to, it was decided that the competition would take place at the nearest zoo. So all the birds watch in eager anticipation as the peacock and the parrot make their way past the fences and past the security guards to the center of the zoo, where crowds of people gathered and sat down to eat lunch. Well, no sooner had the peacock and the parrot made their way to the center of the crowd than people began to notice. Little by little, they left their tables and their chairs, and they began to crowd around these two magnificent, beautiful birds, admiring their beauty and the way they moved. Then the peacock made his move. All of a sudden, he erupted into this majestic dance, and he began to flash his feathers. And all of a sudden, people stopped paying attention to the parrot and started to crowd around the peacock. Well, this only encouraged him to dance with more enthusiasm and to flash his feathers in a way that made people cheer and shout. And then he shot this quick smirk at the parrot, believing that he was winning the competition. Well, after he finished his performance, the peacock was rather surprised to see that not a single scrap of food landed its way at his feet. As the crowd began to disperse and make their way back to their tables and their chairs, all of a sudden they heard a squawk, which caused them to look in the direction of the parrot. And when all eyes were focused on the parrot uttered these three simple words: "Polly wanna cracker." And the peacock stared in shock as one by one people lined up and gave that parrot food. Here's the lesson. Tact, presentation, showmanship are not always good substitutes for clarity.